Welcome to where time falls quiet.
The Sphinx saw rain. So how old is it really? Take a moment to subscribe, so this place of calm is always here for you. What if everything we believe about the origins of civilization is an illusion? What if the monuments that define human history are not creations of a beginning, but remnants of an ending, artifacts left behind by a world that already fell? This is not fantasy, but the unsettling possibility the sands of Giza keep whispering. The possibility that what we call history may only be a fragment of something infinitely older, partially erased, yet not entirely gone, and that the stones themselves, silent yet deliberate, have been trying to tell us exactly that. Imagine standing before the Great Pyramid at dawn. The air is still cool, the first light sliding across each limestone face. The geometry seems impossibly deliberate. Every angle, every proportion feels tuned, as if responding to a code we no longer speak. You sense that these stones were placed not simply to commemorate a man, but to anchor something: time, energy, memory. Beneath the noise of tourists and engines there is another sound, the deep hum of silence that carries the weight of forgotten ages. For generations we have been told the narrative is complete. A civilization rose from the Nile, organized laborers mastered copper chisels, and in a few centuries erected the largest stone structure on Earth. But the more one peers into the evidence, the erosion patterns, the mathematical precision, the astronomical alignments, the more the timeline begins to tremble. The pyramid feels less like a beginning and more like an afterword, the faint echo of an earlier intelligence whose name and language have disintegrated into dust. There is something profoundly bureaucratic about truth. Archaeology, after all, functions through consensus, not revelation. Yet consensus often silences anomalies. A misaligned artifact, an unexplained erosion pattern, a fragment of data that refuses to conform, all get catalogued, noted, and buried under the more comfortable strata of what is already agreed upon. But here at Giza, the anomalies multiply instead of vanishing. They do not whisper of ignorance, they whisper of memory. Look closely at the joints between the stones. Some fit together so precisely that a razor blade cannot slip between them. Others bear marks that suggest advanced methods of cutting, possibly vibration, possibly heat. To the orthodox timeline, these details are eccentricities of craftsmanship. To another reading, they are fingerprints of inheritance, techniques passed from a vanished tradition. The surface tells a story of skill. The pattern hidden beneath speaks of recurrence. The placement of the Great Pyramid's core blocks reveals knowledge not expected of a Bronze Age society. Its base is level within millimeters across more than 5 hectares. The sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions. At the equinox, the sun sets so precisely along the pyramid's edges that it divides light from shadow with an exactness modern architects struggle to emulate. And if you measure carefully, the ratio of height to perimeter encodes the number pi with an accuracy only rediscovered thousands of years later. The question is not whether these are coincidences. The question is how such coincidences could exist without record of the necessary. You might think these anomalies would summon the fascination of every serious researcher. Instead, they evoke discomfort. Because to accept them as meaningful requires admitting something even more disquieting: that cultural evolution may not be linear, that progress is not a ladder but a circle. If an older civilization existed, one capable of mapping the stars with precision equal to ours, one whose architecture defies straightforward replication, then our notion of human development collapses inward like a pyramid with its inner stones removed. Behind the mathematical and geological intrigue, there lies an emotional gravity. To consider that something immense has been lost is to confront the fragility of everything we hold as permanent. The pyramid becomes not a monument to a pharaoh's ego, but to endurance itself, a vault of knowledge designed to outlast fire, flood, and forgetting. The silence inside becomes deliberate, a vacuum meant to carry memory across millennia, its emptiness functioning as a form of message. Only those who listen will understand. Think of this silence not as absence, but as density. Within that stillness, frequencies resonate. Tone tests in the king's chamber register a natural frequency near 110 Hz, a tone associated with brainwave entrainment and resonance of human emotion. Whether by design or coincidence, this acoustic signature transforms space into instrument, amplifying breath, heartbeat, even footsteps into a chorus of memory. The ancient builders may have known that vibration, not inscription, endures. Sound can decay into silence, but vibration imprints the stone itself. If you touch the core of the pyramid, the stone feels cold, but not dead. There is a shimmer of static, a trace of compressed centuries. The limestone is porous, it breathes faintly. You can imagine the weight of time seeping into those layers of calcium carbonate, marking each pore with whispers of water and voice. The structure becomes both monument and organism, preserving the pulse of a world that has exhaled its last breath, yet hasn't stopped existing entirely. Even the name we use, pyramid, is already an interpretation layered upon confusion. In the original language, the monument was called Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu. Horizon implies transition, not ownership. It suggests not creation, but threshold. Perhaps Khufu did not build it, but aligned himself with something that already stood as a marker between worlds, between the era before the flood and the dawn of the one we inhabit. The name itself is an argument that what we call a tomb was never meant for the dead, but for memory of those who feared death could reach knowledge. Evidence outside Egypt reinforces this intuition. Across Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley, early civilizations appear fully formed, with writing, astronomy, law, and geometry already sophisticated, appearing like reactivations rather than inventions. The first city of Uruk does not look like an experiment, it looks like a restoration. The same happens in Egypt, no evidence of developmental trial, only a coherent system, as if a manual had survived from somewhere older. Could it be that Giza was the beacon, the reminder of what once was, reconstructed by those who only half understood its purpose? Imagine for a moment that the sands of Giza are a palimpsest, a page reused, scrubbed of earlier text, but still bearing faint indentations of what was once written. Archaeology trains us to read layers, sediment, pottery, carbon traces. But some histories are etched not in clay but in geometry. The way the three pyramids align with Orion's belt, the specific angles connecting them to solar and lunar cycles, these are not random. They are astronomical signatures, equations transformed into architecture. It is as if the builders sought to lock the heavens into stone, to preserve cosmological data through alignment rather than script. In this view, Giza becomes a time capsule, constructed not for us, but for whoever would come after the inevitable catastrophe. Every flood layer, every myth of destruction, every reset of civilization becomes prelude. When the water receded and humanity rose again, fragments of these signatures remained, incomprehensible at first, mythologized later, only now reinterpretable through our measurements. The ancients may not have been warning us. It may have been themselves they were trying to save by sending data forward through silence. There is a peculiar pattern in human memory. We mythologize the fragments we cannot explain. The further an artifact drifts from comprehension, the holier it becomes. Gods step in to fill the void left by forgotten engineers. Myths of divine builders, of wisdom brought from the sky, emerge when reason strains to account for precision beyond its reach. But myth, in this sense, is not deceit. It is cultural storage, the encryption of technical memory into narrative until the next mind learns how to read the code. If this hypothesis seems too vast, consider the alternative. That coincidence stacked upon coincidence produced the single most precise monument in the world through chance, habit, and intuition alone. Consider that such perfection arose suddenly, then immediately declined afterward, never achieved again by the same culture. Civilizations do not forget how to build their greatest achievement unless the knowledge came from somewhere else. The Egyptians after Khufu could not repeat it. They copied its form but lost its substance. The silence began then, and so we return to that silence, vast and unbroken. You can almost feel it expanding beneath the surface, bound not by sound but by gravity. Each block, each joint, each chamber is a sentence in a language whose grammar is geometry, whose verbs are vibration. The absence of hieroglyphs is not neglect, but intention. The builders wanted their message to be universal, decipherable not through tongue but through mathematics, physics, astronomy. They spoke to the cosmos itself and assumed that one day we would listen. Perhaps that is what differentiates those who created the structure from those who later claimed it. To the latter, the pyramid was an achievement. To the former, it was a necessity, a response to catastrophe, to the fading of something vital. Maybe not all at once, but over time their maps, their sky charts fragmented into myths. The survivors encoded what they could into the most permanent substance available: stone. In doing so, they tried to bridge the pause between worlds. This hypothesis may discomfort us because it implies we are not the apex of progress, but its repetition. That each cycle rises, peaks, collapses, and leaves behind remnants that the next calls mysterious. The flood myths of Sumer, the chaos cycles of Egyptian theology, even Plato's account of Atlantis, they may all be cultural memories of the same fall, retold through different vocabularies. If that is true, then Giza is not the oldest monument. It is merely the latest survivor. In the end, the question is not who built the pyramid, nor even when, but why. What were they trying to preserve so desperately? What record demanded a structure of such immensity, designed to withstand 10,000 years of erosion and human forgetfulness? The answer may be both simple and terrifying. They built it for us. For those who would one day rediscover geometry, lose humility, and begin to believe they were the first. As you stand before Giza in the modern world, surrounded by cameras, metal detectors, and the hum of electric life, the monument feels out of time. The centuries between you and its builders compress into nothing. For a moment, you can sense the continuity, the whisper of ancient engineers, the echo of flood survivors, the pulse of civilization's memory. The Great Pyramid does not shout. It does not demand. It simply endures. And endurance itself is a kind of speech. That is the silence that speaks. The silence that has outlived empires, languages, religions. the silence that hums beneath history's official record, reminding us that forgetting is never complete. There is always a residue, a pattern, a vibration that refuses to die. If the stones of Giza could speak in words, they might tell us that the past is not behind us. It circles endlessly beneath our feet, waiting for the next civilization to listen. Stand again before the Great Pyramid, this time not as a seeker of mystery, but as an engineer. Observe the angles, the joins, the geometry that transcends human tolerance. At a distance, it looks colossal and crude. Up close, it becomes a riddle made of millimeters. The deeper you go into its measurements, the more improbable it becomes, until the possibility of coincidence dissolves into something far older, far more deliberate. Let us begin with the base. Over 5 hectares of limestone platform precisely leveled, not by laser instruments, not by satellites, but by hands and eyes guided by principles we no longer understand. Modern engineers have attempted to replicate such leveling using contemporary tools, yet deviations greater than those in Giza are common. The pyramid's foundation is level within a margin of only a few millimeters, a tolerance equal to modern airport runways. The notion that Bronze Age builders achieved this without high-precision technology invites an unsettling inference. Either their techniques were vastly superior to what archaeology credits, or they inherited methods whose origins have evaporated. The alignment next demands attention. Each side of the Great Pyramid faces true north, south, east, and west with almost perfect accuracy. The average deviation from true north is less than 1/20th of a degree. Imagine attempting that alignment today without GPS, without compasses, with no magnetic or optical aids, only the night sky. The builders appear to have understood Earth's rotation and axial tilt with precision sufficient to anticipate long-term precession, suggesting observational astronomy of a scale comparable to that of professional observatories. The Great Pyramid's height to its perimeter reflects a geometric constant. If the pyramid's height is taken as the radius of a circle whose circumference equals the perimeter of its base, the result yields a near-perfect value for pi. Another ratio produces the golden mean, interwoven into the internal architecture. These proportions are not accidental. They manifest in temples, cathedrals, and even orbital mechanics. Yet here they are, carved into limestone long before recorded geometry formally existed. Either humanity rediscovered an ancient art, or someone never truly lost it at all. Even more confounding is the consistency of its slope. The angle of each face at 51 degrees and 50 minutes achieves both aesthetic harmony and structural integrity at a scale otherwise impossible to sustain. Shift the angle by even a fraction, and the pyramid becomes unstable. The builders somehow found this precise sweet spot, the golden balance between collapse and endurance. For modern architecture, such proportion is achieved through mathematical simulation and stress modeling. For ancient builders, it implies empirical mastery that borders on the impossible. And inside, the precision grows more haunting. In the Grand Gallery, the walls rise with exact parallelism. Each block fitted so tightly it seems pattern-machined. Air shafts no wider than a shoulder continue at steady angles across more than 45 meters of stone, maintaining identical inclinations as though measured by modern surveying equipment. One miscalculation would have caused blockage or collapse, yet each tunnel remains open, straight, acoustic, alive. The architecture is neither random nor ornamental. It serves an unknown function: ventilation, alignment, resonance, or something beyond our engineering vocabulary entirely. Consider the King's Chamber, composed entirely of granite transported from Aswan, nearly 900 kilometers away. Each block weighs between 25 and 80 tons. The ceiling, made of 9 monolithic slabs, sits in pristine balance above empty space. When tested, the chamber vibrates like the interior of an instrument, producing harmonics near 110 Hertz. The frequency corresponds with wave patterns used in modern sonics to influence human cognition. Could it be accidental? Or was this chamber built as a resonator, a generator of experience rather than a tomb? Conventional archaeology hesitates here. It tells us there was no machinery, no advanced mathematics, no metallurgical sophistication beyond copper. Yet copper cannot cut granite with such precision. It grinds, it abrades, but it does not slice. Microscopic analysis of tool marks shows patterns consistent with rotary cutting under high pressure, a method indistinguishable from modern diamond-tipped saws. Were these primitive chisels, or something else entirely, a forgotten technology built from lost principles of vibration and resonance, rather than brute force? The logistical mathematics compound the puzzle. Over 2 million blocks were used, each weighed, shaped, and positioned with precision that compounds exponentially toward the apex. Traditional models propose decades of continuous labor, tens of thousands of workers, and primitive ramps rising miles into the desert. Yet no such ramps have been found. The volume of material alone would demand an infrastructure rivaling modern industry, complete with quarry orchestration and structural testing. To operate in such precision without modern tools implies something beyond labor. It implies knowledge. Numbers cannot explain everything, but they can expose mysteries hiding in plain sight. If each block were set every 2 minutes over 20 years, construction would demand impossible synchronization. Work without interruption, year after year, through famine and flood. In reality, erosion and natural variability make that timeline implausible. Something else structured their process, perhaps mechanical flow systems now lost to corrosion and myth. Some researchers speculate counterweights harnessing water pressure or levitation through sound harmonics. Speculative, yes, but less absurd than the idea that blunt copper hammers achieved surgical precision in solid granite. The anomaly widens with comparison. No subsequent pyramid in Egypt attains comparable perfection. Later structures are smaller, sloppier, less aligned. The art form regresses rather than improves. If genius evolves through trial, why does it reverse here? The implication is corrosive, that the knowledge of Giza did not originate with its builders, but faded in their hands. Each later attempt was an act of imitation. Copies of blueprints misunderstood, echoes of equations once known only by rote. It is at this juncture that the idea of inheritance becomes inescapable. Suppose a surviving group, stranded after a cataclysm, retained fragments of an earlier, geometry encoded through ritual, astronomy recited as myth. They could pass the forms but not the meaning. They could build but not invent. Over generations, ritual overtook understanding until the forms themselves became religion, the mathematics transmuted into theology. In that lineage, Giza becomes both relic and revelation, the last intact prototype of a vanished age of precision. One can trace this pattern beyond the Nile. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the step pyramids of Mesoamerica, the colossal basalt terraces of Baalbek, all mirror aspects of Giza's ratio and alignment. Distances divide continents, but geometry unites intention. These forms emerge like signatures of the same missing culture, fragments distributed after the flood. Stones speaking the same language despite oceans between them. Might precision itself be the universal memory of a world reset? The modern mind demands proof, not poetry. Yet every measurement taken at Giza leads deeper into mathematics that seem to predate mathematics. There are right triangles matching triples of Pythagoras centuries before his birth. Base ratios resonate with planetary cycles, the length of the year, the precession of equinoxes, lunar phases. Whether by design or serendipity, these embeddings imply awareness of Earth's relationship to the cosmos, mapped into architecture so precise it had to be intentional. The builders calculated as if placing stone were an equation solved in 3 dimensions. Perhaps this is the heart of the mystery. The pyramid behaves more like a machine than a monument. Its geometry channels environmental energy, directing heat, magnetic fields, even sound. The narrow shafts aim towards specific stars that drift over millennia with precession, yet align perfectly with them, as if marking an epoch we have misdated. It may be a map, a signal, or simply a memory structured into matter, a technology of remembrance rather than dominance. Imagine working in total darkness inside, torches forbidden by oxygen limits. The builders would have relied on reflection, polished copper mirrors deflecting sunlight deep into passageways. Yet where light diminishes, measurements remain flawless. No torch soot mars the ceilings. It is as if construction itself was conducted in another way altogether, perhaps illuminated by phosphorescent reactions or simple physical understanding long since lost. These are not the traces of ignorance. They are the fingerprints of deliberate scientists disguised as priests. Silence again holds power here. When one claps within the Grand Gallery, sound reflects in harmonic interference, suggesting the space was designed with acoustic architecture in mind. Modern studies show standing waves forming across the inclined walls, concentrating vibration into focal nodes. The effect feels almost liturgical, but functional too, a chamber engineered for resonance, capable of amplifying sound into structural oscillation. In that sense, the pyramid becomes less shrine, more signal, a broadcaster built of stone. We must ask then what was being transmitted: heat, sound, energy, prayer. The ancients may have known frequencies not as music but as tool, vibration as means to lift, cut, even shape solid matter. Granite, subjected to resonance, fractures along nodes. If tuned precisely, it yields like clay. This principle, rediscovered in modern laboratories, could explain how immense blocks were manipulated without industrial equipment. A world that understood sound as structure rather than art might craft miracles invisible to conventional. For millennia, the accepted story has reduced these feats to manpower and divine favor. Yet that dismissal hides the deeper awe, the recognition that precision can itself be sacred. The builders were not merely artisans, but archivists safeguarding information through proportion. Each angle is a verse, each layer a page. The Great Pyramid, when read correctly, becomes a document carved in stone instead of script, its grammar geometry, its syntax alignment. It speaks in a universal tongue, the mathematics of existence itself. So when modern archaeologists measure, they are not uncovering superstition, but decoding purpose. Every stone holds a logic written in silence. The pyramid's anomalies, its precise alignment, improbable tolerances, and geometrical constants are not accidents of skill, but declarations of continuity. The past is not primitive, it is encrypted. We are the illiterate descendants struggling to remember how to read. In the end, precision becomes the anomaly, not because it is rare, but because it survives. Long after tools rust and languages fade, mathematics endures as the memory of mind. The Great Pyramid stands as the most precise artifact ever made by human hands. if they were human at all in the sense we understand. Its perfection mocks our arrogance and invites humility. For in these stones lies a message simple and profound. The universe is not random, and neither is its architecture. Perhaps that is the true purpose of Giza, not a tomb for a king, but a calibration for a species. A monument tuned to remind each generation that order once ruled chaos, that and spirit once spoke the same language, that knowledge can be destroyed, but precision cannot be faked. The builders may be gone, their names erased, but their equation stands. And every time we measure it, we are hearing their voice again, resonating through time, asking a single question. Will we remember before we, too, are forgotten? There are scars on the body of the Sphinx, lines that run deep, uneven, and distinctly curved. To most, they appear as age, the mere wear of wind and sand, carving the monument into its present form. But a closer eye reveals something older, something elemental. These grooves follow not the pattern of wind erosion, but of rainfall, water flowing over stone for centuries, maybe millennia. It is a geological record pretending to be a myth. Imagine standing there just before sunrise. The desert cold chills your lungs. The stone underfoot feels porous, gritty, and ancient. As the light fills the horizon, you can see how the Sphinx sits low within a hollow, a basin carved from the bedrock itself. It does not rise proudly like the pyramids. It sinks as though half swallowed by the earth. And that, perhaps, is its first confession. It was never carved in the desert we now see. The landscape changed around it. A geologist approaches such things without sentiment. Rocks do not lie, even when men do. Under microscope and laser scan, the patterns on the Sphinx reveal distinct phases of erosion, some from wind, but others unmistakably from water. The curves are rounded, the vertical channels smooth, the telltale signatures of precipitation-driven weathering. Yet Egypt's desert has known no significant rainfall for at least 7,000 years. So the question emerges like thunder from the sand. When did the Sphinx see the rain? The conventional answer is impossibly neat. Egyptologists insist the Sphinx dates to roughly 4.5 millennia ago, built during the reign of Khafre, whose pyramid stands beside it. It is a tidy equation. King, temple, monument. But beneath the neatness, the geology rebels. The erosion marks defy the climate models of that era. There was simply not enough rain to carve that depth, nor have subsequent centuries produced enough weathering to account for it. The Sphinx should not look as it does, unless it remembers an era before the desert. Imagine if it were not built in the desert at all, but in a landscape still green, when the Nile Valley was lush with monsoon rains. Geological records show that before the Sahara became desert, vast savannas stretched across North Africa, rivers carving channels long lost beneath the dunes. If the Sphinx bears the fingerprints of that world, then it must predate dynastic Egypt itself. It may belong to an older civilization whose memory dissolved before hieroglyphs could capture it. Robert Schoch, a geologist once dismissed for daring to say what the evidence demanded, stood before these grooves and called them what they were: water erosion. His conclusion was simple yet devastating. If those patterns were carved by rain, the Sphinx must be at least twice as old as official chronology claims. The reaction from academia was not disbelief, it was panic. Because if he was right, Egypt's entire historical sequence was wrong. Civilization did not begin in the Nile Valley. It was reborn there. But stone speaks softly, indifferent to academia. You can trace the erosion pattern with your hand, feeling how the depth increases lower down, where runoff would have collected in ancient storms. The limestone feels smoothed, almost melted in places. In the enclosure wall behind the Sphinx, the cuts curve inward like ancient river channels. This is not the fingerprint of time. It is the memory of climate. The rock remembers water long after the sky forgot to give it. The head complicates the story further. Proportions between head and body are misaligned, too small, almost toy-like compared to the torso. Geologists and sculptors alike have suggested that the head was recarved, perhaps during dynastic restoration, altering an older monument into a newer icon. If true, the original face could predate the known Egyptian kings, perhaps depicting a different species entirely of humanity, whose name has disintegrated like the missing nose. It means the Sphinx isn't one chronicle, but two, separated by flood and forgetting. Inside this erosion puzzle lies something more profound than chronology. It's psychology. The mind recoils from the idea that the Sphinx could observe storms in what was once a green Africa. We want continuity, a steady upward line from chaos to order. But geology laughs at progress. It shows regression, catastrophe, renewal. If the Sphinx predates the flood myths of Sumer, then those tales of divine retribution might be shadows of planetary memory rather than religious imagination. Erosion is not fast. To carve that depth, centuries of heavy rainfall had to fall onto exposed limestone. That means not just a brief anomaly, but a sustained period of tropical climate. The Sphinx is, in effect, a climate archive carved into art. Its grooves record hydrological history, the transition from wet to parched, from fertile to barren. In that sense, it is both monument and meteorological record, an artifact of frozen in stone, misunderstood by those who read only symbols. Now consider how the erosion aligns with sedimentary data around the Giza plateau. Beneath the sand lie layers of redeposited river silt, mixed with shell fragments, marine residues flung inland by ancient floods. One layer corresponds with the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden cooling and violent storms roughly 12,000 years ago. If rainfall carved the Sphinx then, it would place its creation deep in prehistory, before written language, before pharaohs, before even the mythic kings of Sumer, a remnant of the world before the ice melted. Imagine the builder, whoever they were, watching the sky turn black with tropical rain as the world changed around them. They carved a lion, not a sphinx yet, not a god, just the symbol of power and survival, perhaps marking a horizon, perhaps mourning what was being lost. Thousands of years later, others came and recarved the head, added temples and renamed it. But the body beneath remained eroded and eternal, still whispering the story of water and ruin to anyone patient enough to listen. Every part of the Sphinx tells this dual story: the precision of its base, leveled before flooding, the mismatch of stylistic eras layered upon one another. Archaeologists call it reuse. Geologists call it stratigraphy. Both terms mean the same thing: inheritance. One culture found what had once been the monument of another and simply adopted it. Khafra may not have built the Sphinx. He might have found it, half buried, and claimed ownership as kings so often do. This interpretation changes everything. It transforms Egypt from the beginning of civilization to its second act. It implies that monuments like the Sphinx, and perhaps the earliest pyramids, were restorations, not creations. The hieroglyphic record would then begin not at humanity's dawn, but at its reawakening after a global catastrophe. The Nile civilization would be the inheritor, not the inventor of its own ancestors' knowledge, and the Sphinx would be its silent link across that abyss. But silence is deceptive. To stand within its enclosure is to feel something ancient pressing inward from the stones. The sunlight does not reach everywhere. Even in day, portions remain in half shadow, as though time itself refuses to illuminate them. Wind generates a faint vibration across the eroded groove lines, producing a tone almost like breath. If one listens, one can imagine the echo of rain, soft, continuous, infinite. The monument seems to hum not with life, but with memory. If the Sphinx saw the flood, then the myth of the Great Deluge, so universal across cultures, might be less myth than field report. Gilgamesh, Noah, Ziusudra, all stories of memory lost and civilization wiped clean. Perhaps survivors carried fragments of their worlds across continents, encoding them in myth until rebuilding became possible. The Sphinx, carved in limestone rather than clay tablets, endures as the most literal fossil of that era. A message from before the silence. And yet, even this evidence is resisted. Academic inertia functions like gravity. It bends perception, holding minds within familiar orbits. Suggesting an older Sphinx shatters the existing model, forcing historians to accept that memory can last in stone long after paper ends. To admit that possibility would mean rewriting not only Egypt's history, but humanity's. Because if one monument survives from a forgotten epoch, then others may wait beneath layers still unexcavated, still dreaming in geology's archive. What remains undeniable is the physical data. The channels are vertical, rounded, and deep. Their direction contradicts wind erosion entirely. Only persistent rainfall descending from above could cut such shapes. The material composition, the softer sublayers of limestone eaten away while the harder ridges remain, matches known hydrological erosion elsewhere on the planet. The evidence is empirical, reproducible, indifferent to theory. What resists is not the rock, but the human need for order. In the end, the Sphinx becomes more than archaeology. It becomes reflection, a mirror for our fear of impermanence. If the stone beneath our feet can remember storms older than civilization, then perhaps our own age will one day be reduced to similar grooves and silences. Knowledge erodes, memory fades. But the physical world, indifferent and eternal, remembers without emotion. The Sphinx is proof. Forgetting is temporary. The earth never forgets. Imagine the final storm that buried it once more in sand. The water receded, leaving silence, and history began again. Kings came, carved their names, turned it into a god, and declared it eternal. But eternity is not fame, it is survival. And as long as the Sphinx stands, eroded and watchful, its body will continue to whisper through the dry air the same secret phrase. I have seen rain. I have seen the world before yours. I am what remains when memory fails. Among the dust of forgotten storerooms in the Museum of Cairo, there lies a slab of stone most visitors never see. Its surface is fractured, its hieroglyphs faint, as if it has tried for centuries to erase itself. Yet within those worn lines, something extraordinary survives. A sentence so inconvenient that it threatened the foundation of Egyptology. The artifact is called the Inventory Stela, and it quietly accuses civilization of amnesia. The stela is a bureaucratic document by appearance alone. Its text lists ceremonial objects, temples, and restorations allegedly commissioned by Pharaoh Khufu, the same ruler credited with erecting the Great Pyramid. But among the lists, scholars found something destabilizing. A claim that Khufu repaired a temple belonging to Isis near the Great Pyramid, a temple said to already be ancient in his time. The Sphinx, too, is described as already standing when Khufu encountered it. It does not say he built it, it says he restored it. If this were true, the entire chronology collapses. Khufu becomes not the builder, but the inheritor of Egypt's greatest monument. The Great Pyramid ceases to be a feat of royal ambition and instead becomes evidence of a forgotten epoch, one remembered dimly through ritual. The Inventory Stela redefines Egypt not as a beginning but as a renewal, suggesting the pharaohs presided over a vast archaeological inheritance rather than a technological creation. Institutions dismissed the stela almost instantly. They called it a later forgery, a pious imitation from the late period, devoid of historical worth. But that dismissal reveals more unease than certainty. The writing is archaic, blending grammatical forms uncommon in later centuries. Its composition bears none of the florid myth-making of later Egypt. It is dry, economic, almost clerical. It reads less like invention and more like inventory, exactly as its name implies. Bureaucracy rarely fabricates poetry. The content itself feels too restrained for legend. There are no miracles, no divine interventions, just a simple record. Khufu found existing sanctuaries, restored them, and worshipped at the Sphinx. There is no attempt to glorify him as creator of the wonders. The humility of it by Egyptian royal standards is strange. Kings declared themselves gods. They did not confess to repairing the works of greater ages. The humility itself becomes evidence. Imagine standing in Khufu's court. The air smells of resin and crushed desert herbs. The horizon gleams with limestone, but not new limestone. Weathered stone, already ancient, softened by ages of sun. The priests whisper that these structures are older than memory, remnants of the time before the floods. Khufu, ever ambitious, commands their restoration not to imitate eternity, but to rejoin it. The stela becomes, in that context, an act of remembrance rather than construction. Mainstream Egyptology cannot easily admit such remembrance because it collapses the linear narrative of human progress. If Khufu was a restorer, who were the builders? An older Nile culture now vanished without writing? Refugees of a pre-dynastic cataclysm? The implications radiate far beyond Egypt. They demand a re-evaluation of civilizations worldwide, their origins perhaps all branches of the same lost trunk. The stela does not simply reorder dates, it reorders ancestry. To hold that stone in the imagination is to feel how fragile orthodoxy truly is. A single inscription, a few lines of hieroglyphs can illuminate or overturn centuries of scholarship. The text doesn't shout, it murmurs. Yet the murmur contradicts everything the textbooks claim. It is the kind of evidence that can only be dismissed, not disproven. And that dismissal becomes the echo chamber where knowledge disappears. The location of the supposed temple adds weight to its claim. Ancient maps and excavation records show remnants of an older foundation beside the Great Pyramid, precisely where the stela describes the Temple of Isis. The stones are weathered differently from later structures, suggesting greater antiquity. If the inscription is correct, that temple stood for millennia before Khufu, built by people aware of celestial geometry, later mirrored by his pyramid. He may have been drawn to Giza not to innovate, but to anchor himself in its existing sanctity. Compare this to the Sphinx's erosion, to the uncanny precision of the pyramid's layout. Each anomaly finds harmony through the stela's simple assertion, these structures were already there. their purpose forgotten, their builders long gone. They were re-inhabited, renamed, refurbished like relics from a divine workshop. Egypt's founders might have awoken among the ruins of a world they barely understood, mistaking technology for divinity, physics for ritual. In that misunderstanding, civilization was reborn. Every civilization crafts a myth of its own origin. We are drawn to beginnings because they reassure us of control. Yet some origins resist domestication. The Inventory Stela offers an origin that is humbling, almost humiliating, that the golden age we celebrate was itself a recovery project, that the greatest empire arose from salvaged fragments left by forgotten hands. Such ancestry undermines the pride of progress, turning history into archaeology of memory. Close your eyes and imagine the hand carving those hieroglyphs. The scribe is not a propagandist. He is a record keeper documenting the restorations of his king. The reed moves with patience, the pigment drying slowly in the desert air. He inscribes data into eternity, unaware that millennia later his simple notation will explode the coherence of modern belief. He writes of walls already blackened by age, of doors to shrines already broken, of idols worshipped by men who had vanished without names. The Stela lists the House of Isis, Mistress of the Pyramid. The title itself demands a pause. The mistress, not the mother. The phrasing alludes to guardianship, to preservation. Isis, the goddess of restoration and resurrection, is invoked not as deity of birth, but of repair. The builders of Khufu's time seem to have understood themselves not as creators, but caretakers, vessels through which ancient order could be reanimated. The pyramid becomes less tomb and more interface, a connection point between what was destroyed and what could be rebuilt. If the Stela's testimony is true, it captures a moment when Egypt looked backward with reverence rather than forward with ambition. It saw the past not as ignorance but as grandeur. Such humility contrasts sharply with modern attitudes. We measure knowledge by novelty, dismissing anything that came before as superstition. But the ancients may have believed the opposite, that knowledge had already peaked and that their duty was to preserve its remnants through ritual, architecture, and continuity. Archaeologists debate the inscription's age using style and syntax. Those who argue for forgery point to linguistic anachronisms suggestive of later authorship. Yet these details can also reflect copywork from original texts transcribed during restorations. Scribes often updated old inscriptions into newer orthographies to ensure legibility. In such a case, the stela might not be a product of falsification, but of preservation, a translation of truth beyond the reach of time. The act of rewriting does not negate authenticity, it extends survival. The deeper significance of the stela lies not in its chronological accuracy but in its philosophical posture. It reverses the hierarchy of knowledge. Even if written centuries after Khufu, it reflects a living memory that Egypt's own monuments were older than Egypt itself. Whether literal or symbolic, that belief unites with geological evidence, astronomical alignments, and global mythic parallels into a coherent picture. Civilization remembering a civilization. To read the Stela today is to eavesdrop on a dialogue between two worlds, the known and the forgotten. Each glyph functions like a bridge between epochs, its meaning trembling under the weight of millennia. Scholars may dismiss it, but the text endures despite erasure, exactly as the pyramid endures despite wind. The dismissal becomes part of the story. Another layer of sediment over truth. But truth, like limestone, resists dissolution. It waits. Imagine returning to the spot described by the Stela, the light of late afternoon slanting across the sand. You brush away the thin dust covering a foundation stone, and for a brief moment, you see how the cut of its edge differs from later work. Smoother, more eroded, melted almost as if by rain. The stone seems to breathe. It whispers of temples that stood before the Nile shifted course, before dynasties numbered themselves, before humanity divided knowledge into eras. The Stela's words cease being legend, they become memory reawakened. Perhaps that is why orthodox narratives reject it so vehemently. Not because it is implausible, but because it is too plausible. Because it joins with too many stray pieces. The water-worn Sphinx, the impossible precision of the Great Pyramid, the universal myth of a world reset by flood. Together they form a chorus too coherent to ignore. The Stela becomes not an anomaly, but a translation, interpreting what Giza has been saying all along. At its core, the Inventory Stela reminds us that time edits mercilessly, but never perfectly. The past resists its own burial, sending up fragments like fossils through the soil of certainty. Each fragment tests our humility. Do we dare admit that we do not stand at the beginning, but at the midpoint of something cyclical? The Stela's forbidden truth is exactly this, that we are standing amid ruins from a civilization so old that history itself cannot remember its name. So, the stone in the museum continues to wait, mute but eloquent. It does not care whether we call it genuine or fake, whether we archive it or mock it. Its meaning is written into the silence surrounding its display case, into the dust that collects like centuries condensed. The Stela knows patience, for time is its accomplice. And one day, when our own languages fade, it will still tell the same quiet truth, that Khufu repaired what another world had already built and called that service to the gods. There is a night above the Giza plateau that makes the desert feel eternal. The stars burn with a clarity rarely visible in cities, a sky crystalline enough to see not just constellations, but architecture itself. And then, at that moment, when darkness saturates everything, you recognize something unsettling. The three great pyramids mirror the stars above. Not roughly, not symbolically, but with geometric precision. The heavens and the earth are reflections of one design. For centuries, the alignment between the pyramids and Orion's belt has been whispered as coincidence. 3 stars, 3 monuments. It is a tempting metaphor, nothing more. But this dismissal evaporates under measurement. The angles between Al-Nitak, Al-Nilam, and Mintaka correspond to the precise ground plan of Giza, their relative orientation preserved even through precessional drift. It is a cosmic mirror so accurate that its deviation matches the stars' offset along the Milky Way itself. The builders weren't stargazing, they were mapping heaven onto stone. Consider what that means. Orion was associated in old Egyptian texts with Osiris, lord of resurrection and renewal. To align the tombs of kings with this celestial figure is to claim continuity beyond death, but also to enshrine cosmic mechanics within geometry. The placement isn't devotional, it is procedural. It encodes the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble of Earth's axis taking roughly 26,000 years to complete. Whoever planned Giza understood not just astronomy, but deep time. Modern instruments confirm that during a previous cycle around 10,500 years before our era, Orion's belt aligned perfectly over the pyramids as they stand today. If true, that date predates the accepted origin of Egyptian civilization by nearly half its assumed age. The implication is devastating. Either the builders predicted that alignment across millennia, or they built when it already existed. Both possibilities imply knowledge of astronomical periodicity that would not be formally discovered again until modern. Each pyramid's orientation towards celestial north reinforces this impression. Their deviation from true north is measured in arc minutes, comparable to contemporary observatories. At the latitude of Giza, stars used for orientation shift slowly due to axial precession, suggesting recalibration at a time when constellations sat differently across the horizon. The pattern of alignment corresponds most precisely not to the sky of Khufu, but to an earlier epoch when Vega, rather than Polaris, marked the northern pole. The stone is a calendar written for the cosmos. To the builders, heaven was not a place of worship, but of synchronization. The pyramid fields across Egypt repeat these patterns at varying scales, the smaller pyramids positioned along invisible lines connecting them to solar and stellar coordinates. The geography itself becomes mnemonic, a relational diagram between sky and sand. It suggests a worldview not centered on terrestrial power, but on energetic harmony with celestial cycles. The builders were not commanding the heavens, they were joining them. Inscriptions later associated with funerary texts hint that the soul of the pharaoh would ascend through the stars of Orion to dwell with the gods. But strip away religion and the metaphor becomes operational. Ascension is alignment, the calibration of human structure to universal geometry. Each pyramid becomes both laboratory and initiatory device, a mechanism through which the microcosm mirrors the macrocosm. Architecture becomes instrument, and the sky its resonant field. There is something unsettlingly mathematical in these correspondences. The distance between Giza and other megalithic sites, Teotihuacan, Baalbek, or even ancient structures buried beneath the sea, often correlates with angular divisions of planetary geometry, as though placed within a global coordinate system based on geodesy rather than chance. The implication expands far beyond Egypt, hinting at a civilization whose reach measured Earth itself. Stone, in that sense, becomes the hard drive of lost knowledge, distributed architecture encoding the same cosmic constants across continents. One cannot examine this without confronting the precision of the pyramid's internal architecture. The descending and ascending passages align with specific stars, not randomly but targeting those used to mark epochs. The southern shaft of the king's chamber once pointed directly to Al-Nitak, the easternmost star of Orion's belt. The northern shaft targeted Thuban in Draco, the pole star of a different age. These alignments function as both calendar and prophecy, measuring the slow drift of time through stellar precession. Each alignment describes a moment, and together they describe a cycle. To call this intentional is to accept that the builders possessed astronomical tools and records far surpassing Bronze Age possibilities. They observed not months but millennia, treating time as geometry. Such perception requires stability, a continuity of observation impossible for transient societies. It implies lineage, knowledge transmitted unsubtly across cataclysm, recalibrated to ensure that the next civilization could inherit the blueprint. The Great Pyramid thus becomes the central waypoint of a planet-sized observatory, its data encoded in angles rather than words. Imagine the night of alignment as the builders intended it. The air would have been electric with clarity, noise replaced by that cosmic silence only deserts know. Orion rose precisely above the horizon, his belt mirrored by the luminous summits of the pyramids. The Milky Way stretched like a river of light echoing the Nile's curve below. The world above repeated the world below. It was not just symbolism, It was synchronization between Earth and cosmos, the eternal memory of a civilization that understood balance. Even the dimensions of the Great Pyramid reveal hidden cosmology. Its perimeter divided by double its height produces pi, linking circle to square, heaven to earth. Within its chamber system, proportions encode the golden ratio, a constant manifest in everything from spiral galaxies to human anatomy. Each measurement becomes metaphor and equation simultaneously. The architect did not choose numbers for convenience. Each one is a coordinate anchoring mathematics to metaphysics. The building itself breathes ratio. When considered alongside the inventory, Stela's claims this unity takes on new gravity. If Khufu merely restored Giza, then the alignment and proportions were inherited, not invented. The cosmos being mapped on the plateau belongs to a timeline older than dynastic Egypt, one perhaps devastated by the same shifts recorded in flood myths. In that sense, every block becomes testimony to continuity through disaster, an architectural data archive built to outlive its makers. The stars were their redundancy system, the sky their eternal mirror. Archaeologists once mocked the notion of astronomical alignment as romanticism, but modern measurements have muted the laughter. Orientation too exact to dismiss, proportions too coherent to ignore. The data speaks even when interpretation recoils. It forces a question uncomfortably simple. If we rediscovered precession and planetary geometry with telescopes and computers, how did they? Chance does not carve equations into limestone with such devotion. To imagine the builders as mere masons enslaved to Pharaoh is to insult the evidence. These were engineers operating at a scale of comprehension nearly alien to us. They observed the Earth as a member of a system, not an isolated world. Each pyramid was a harmonic node, part of a planetary orchestra through which energy, gravity, and resonance could harmonize with stellar cycles. It was architecture as cosmos, structure as script. Perhaps the ancients understood something we have forgotten, that matter and meaning are not separate. The same geometry that governs stars governs life. The same ratios binding galaxies shape the spirals of shells. To build in alignment with the sky was not superstition, it was coherence. They were encoding survival, embedding permanence through proportion, ensuring that when memory died, the laws themselves would speak for them. The builders trusted mathematics more than language. Looking at Giza today, surrounded by pollution and satellites, the alignment remains. The stars have drifted, but the message persists. Even misaligned by precession, the pattern endures its echo across ages. It is as if the builders wrote a sentence across epochs, that everything which lives within the sky also lives within us, and that civilizations which align with the cosmos endure beyond destruction. The pyramid's shadow is a clock hand marking eons rather than hours. Such architecture surpasses both art and it becomes metaphysical communication. The builders designed for readers who would emerge thousands of years later, those capable of measuring and recognizing the pattern. It is no wonder modernity approaches with disbelief. The message wasn't meant for those who forgot how to look upward. A world obsessed with progress turns inward, blind to a past that navigated by stars. Meanwhile, the stones keep recounting the same celestial truth, awaiting comprehension. So here we stand, beneath the same sky, our instruments more precise, yet our memory far weaker. The pattern above us speaks in every photon, every constellation still whispering the geometry of an older world. When the desert wind quiets, you can almost imagine their voices carried across time, not in words but in alignment, telling us what they once knew, that nothing we build endures unless it resonates with the cosmos. The pyramids endure because they are not merely on Earth, they are of it, and of the stars too. Perhaps that is why, even now, those who measure the ruins feel unease. The exactness is too intentional, the symmetry too bright. It suggests design far greater than any dynastic order, and an unknowable intelligence at work. Whether human, divine, or something lost between, we cannot say. But the alignment is undeniable. It is the oldest conversation between the ground and the sky, carved into the skin of our planet. It is architecture aspiring to immortality through mathematics, and the stars have been listening ever since. Deep within the heart of the Great Pyramid lies silence, unlike any other on Earth. You descend hunched and cautious, the air cooling with every step. The tunnel narrows until even breath feels invasive against the stillness. What greets you there is not death, nor treasure, but emptiness. A void designed with purpose, a geometry meant to speak without words. The deeper one travels, the more the structure begins to feel alive. The air grows heavy, charged with ions, vibrating faintly as if the stone itself hums. There is no decoration here, no hieroglyphs, no paint, no plea to the gods. Only megalithic precision, granite blocks fitted into chambered resonance. The absence of text is itself text. This silence is architectural language. Scholars have long asked why no mummies or sarcophagi have ever been conclusively found in the Great Pyramid, despite its common labeling as a tomb. Yet the evidence contradicts the title. The king's chamber holds an empty granite coffer, uncarved, unsealed, uninscribed. No trace of offerings, no funerary debris, no soot. The space radiates function over ritual, a device rather than a chapel. So what was it built to contain or to generate? Inside that chamber, the sound of a single voice transforms. Words stretch. Echoes fold back upon themselves in harmonic interference. Acoustic engineers have measured the resonance. A frequency near 110 Hz dominates, creating a deep physical vibration in the chest cavity. It is a frequency known to stir emotion, even trance, and to synchronize hemispheric brain activity. Whether by luck or by lost, the builders crafted a sentient silence, a chamber that augments perception and stills thought. Imagine lighting a torch there. The granite glimmers, quartz flecks scattering dim amber light. The air does not circulate as expected. It swirls. Each vibration seems to move through your body, not merely around it. The space manipulates sound waves as fluid, funneling them toward the center, building resonance like the inside of a cello. It feels less like being in a room, and more like being inside an instrument, left forever waiting to be played. If this place was meant for death, then why design acoustics so sensitive that they amplify heartbeats? Why construct shafts so narrow yet so precise they mimic the angles of star alignments? Why polish the granite until even candlelight refracts like crystal? The simplest answer, that it was never meant for burial, remains the most daring. This was not a tomb, it was a mechanism. The chamber's proportions correspond to harmonic ratios found in musical theory, 1:2:3. The geometry alone produces standing waves along every axis, harmonizing naturally at frequencies our own ears can detect but cannot fully understand. The builders knew resonance not as metaphor, but as material. They treated vibration as architecture. Each chamber above and below acts as a resonant cavity, transferring energy through the pyramid like organs in a single body. Above the king's chamber lies the so-called relieving chambers, 5 stacked spaces allegedly built to distribute weight. They are named dryly, their purpose reduced to engineering necessity. Yet closer inspection suggests something more deliberate. Each gap alters the vibration pattern of the structure, layering harmonic reinforcement from chamber to chamber. Weight relief, perhaps, but also acoustic tuning. The Great Pyramid may be the largest resonator on the planet, a stone symphony frozen in low frequency. Think of the so-called air shafts, often mislabeled as ventilation. They pierce the walls with unwavering precision, rising through meters of stone to emerge at calculated angles towards specific stars. At one time, they aligned directly with Orion and Sirius, both symbols of transition between mortal and cosmic realms. Air ducts would require open pathways, but these were sealed, narrow, and functionally useless for breath. They served another purpose altogether: conduits for resonance, for energy, or for sound. Descending farther to the Queen's chamber, the sensation shifts. The temperature cools and the echo softens into whisper. Here, shafts veer outward from the chamber at similarly deliberate angles, their ends once sealed by stone plugs. Symbolic airflow, or calibration nodes to adjust the frequency produced by oscillations from above. No answers survive. What remains is the haunting precision of coordination between geometry and acoustic behavior. The lowest level, the so-called subterranean chamber, is even stranger. Carved directly into bedrock far beneath the pyramid, it looks unfinished, a raw wound of stone. Yet every angle follows deliberate measurement. Even the roughness hides precision. Sound here does not echo, it absorbs. If the upper chambers resonate like a cathedral, the lower one consumes vibration entirely, forming an acoustic zero point. The pyramid thus houses both sound and silence, frequency and void, the entire spectrum of resonance encoded in matter. If one treats the pyramid as a circuit, the subterranean chamber becomes the grounding node. The Queen's and King's chambers function as transformers, each tuned to distinct frequencies. The shafts serve as conductors, channeling vibration or perhaps energy of another. Electrical, electromagnetic, or something has not yet categorized. In this reading, the pyramid emerges as more than monument. It is a machine operating across geological and cosmic harmonics. Those who dismiss such notions cling to comfort, to narratives that reduce mystery to decoration. But stone does not lie, and geometry is not mythology. The ancients understood vibration as principle. In creation, sound gives form to matter. In echoing that cosmic law, the pyramid may represent an attempt to reproduce the conditions of Genesis itself, to imitate in miniature the resonance of creation. The empty chambers become the hum of the first note, preserved through architecture. Archaeologists protest that this interpretation strays from evidence, yet evidence can whisper louder than it shouts. What do we know from fact? That the pyramid's internal structure shows refinement in physics centuries before we rediscovered such precision. That its measurements encode mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio. That even NASA-grade instruments detect electromagnetic anomalies within these spaces. Facts, all silent but stubborn. Interpretation is the only part that trembles. Consider for a moment the possibility that the pyramid was meant to sustain life, not memorialize death. Ancient texts speak of transformations, ascensions, subtle energies between flesh and cosmos. Perhaps the king's chamber was not a tomb, but a place of calibration, a chamber to harmonize body and mind with Earth's frequencies. Placed there in meditation or ritual, One might attune to resonance itself. The traveller would emerge changed, not deceased. The tomb becomes a womb. In the absence of bodies, that interpretation remains difficult to refute. What we find within are not bones, but vibrations, not relics, but ratios. The granite coffer fits perfectly within nodal points where these frequencies converge. Strike its interior, and it sings. The note lingers in the air like memory, soft yet enduring. Those who have heard it describe an unearthly tone, as if the entire structure momentarily awakens, remembering what it was built for. Silence returns quickly after, as though embarrassed by its own confession. Yet something shifts in the listener, a pressure behind the eyes, an undeniable sensation that these chambers are not inert. They respond. Whether one believes in energy, frequency, or simply awe, the effect is measurable in the heart's rhythm and in the vibration of bone. The pyramid interacts with the living body like a tuning fork crafted for the soul. As you ascend back toward the daylight, the passage narrows once more. That silence follows you, thicker than before, clinging like invisible dust. You emerge blinking into the blinding sun, the noise of tourists foreign, trivial. For a fleeting instant, the outside world feels thin, fragile, poorly built compared to the symmetry you've just left. You realize the pyramid's internal logic persists outside its walls, echoing faintly across the desert and through time. The emptiness suddenly makes sense. Emptiness preserves potential. It is the pause in the universe's sentence, the breath before creation begins again. The builders sculpted nothingness and shaped it with precision, because silence, once tuned, becomes the medium through which eternity speaks. Tomb or not, the chambers accomplish their purpose still. They resonate. Perhaps they are waiting for humanity to remember the tone, the frequency of the forgotten world. That is the paradox of these spaces. Though they appear deserted, they are not empty at all. They are filled with the hum of time, the pressure of disbelief, the residue of forgotten sound. Step inside long enough and even silence begins to move you. The pyramid does not need guardians or inscriptions. Its message is pure vibration carried forward beyond all language. And those who dare to listen will feel it without translation, pulsing beneath the ribs, reminding us that the oldest technology of all is harmony. Across continents divided by oceans, mountains, and time, the same story reappears in stone. At first it seems coincidence, the same angular platforms, the same interlocking blocks, the same astronomical orientations. Yet, as the pattern expands, so does the unease. How did cultures that never met, separated by tens of thousands of kilometers, build structures that seem to have followed the same forgotten mathematics? The question itself becomes a frequency that resonates through history, accident, or inheritance. If one were to fly across the planet tracing the map of megalithic architecture, a pattern forms like a constellation sprawling across Earth. Start in Giza, then curve west to the mysterious terraces of Baalbek, where blocks weighing more than 1,000 tons rest with surgical precision. Then leap across the Atlantic to the temple platforms of Tiwanaku, where andesite blocks interlock without mortar in the thin, freezing air of the Altiplano. Southward lie the cyclopean walls of Cusco and Sacsayhuaman, each stone uniquely shaped yet fitting perfectly, as though poured rather than carved. The craftsmanship is identical, the spirit unmistakable, the echo undeniable. Throughout these places, tools never found, plans never written, and methods never recorded raise the same question. Who taught them? The stones themselves carry the evidence. At Puma Punku, block faces are drilled with right angles so precise they form grooves within a tolerance of fractioned millimeters, as though cut by machinery that should not exist in antiquity. At Baalbek, trenches around the Temple of Jupiter mark alignments so perfect they mirror celestial coordinates identical to those encoded at Giza. And at Easter Island, statues of silent giants stare toward the horizon, their design echoing both stone templates and facial symmetries reminiscent of sculptural styles thousands of kilometers away. The language is architectural, not cultural. To deny the connection is simple, to explain the precision, impossible. Conventional history insists every culture must have evolved its own techniques independently, driven by the same human logic toward the same results. But this rational convenience collapses beneath the weight of detail. Identical stone bonding patterns, earthquake-resistant interlocks, and mathematically optimal wall inclines repeat with uncanny fidelity. Either humankind independently reinvented the same lost method multiple times, or each civilization inherited fragments of a system so ancient its origin is untraceable. The implication of inheritance draws us back to catastrophe. Imagine the flood described in myths from Sumer to the Andes, not as morality tale but as cataclysmic memory, a geological reset. Survivors scattered, taking slivers of knowledge written not on tablets but in memory. Those fragments became the seeds of re-emergent civilizations: Egypt, Sumer, Mesoamerica, the Indus. Each carried an incomplete manual of the world that once was, encoded in proportion and stone. The similarities are not plagiarism, but recollection. There is also the enigma of astronomical consistency. Across these disparate cultures, structures align to solstices, equinoxes, and stellar risings, all mirroring the north-south and east-west axes with unnerving accuracy. The citadel of Machu Picchu captures the June solstice sunrise in perfect precision. The pyramids of Teotihuacan trace the route of Orion's belt along Earth's surface, tilted at the same angle as Giza's. The Mayan observatory at Chichen Itza calculates Venus's synodic cycle as precisely as modern astronomy. This was not rustic mysticism. It was systemic, wrapped in ritual clothing. They watched the heavens not to pray, but to remain synchronized with it. Such precision hints at a conceptual unity, a civilization before the flood, global in scope yet fractured by time. The ancients themselves seem to remember fragments of this original order. Legends of Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl, and Oannes describe godlike beings arriving from the sea, bearing knowledge of architecture, agriculture, and astronomy. Their names change, but roles remain constant: bearers of light after darkness, restorers of order after chaos. Perhaps not gods, but remnants of that older culture teaching what could be salvaged before fading into myth. When explorers first compared Egyptian and South American pyramid building, the reaction oscillated between fascination and denial. How, they asked, could such resemblance arise if oceans divided the builders? Yet the shared symbolism reaches beyond shape. It includes the numbers themselves. The ratio of height to base, the orientation to cardinal directions, even the recurrence of triadic layouts echo across both hemispheres. The old explanation that pyramids are simply efficient shapes for stacking dissolves in the face of mirrored mathematics. Purpose preceded practicality. In Egypt, the pyramids honor the sun's rebirth. In Mesoamerica, the same triadic stairways celebrate descent and return. At Giza, the plateau mirrors heaven. At Teotihuacan, the city is called the place where men become gods. The grammar of sacred geometry crosses oceans and languages as fluidly as light. It is as though each culture spoke a dialect of one silent sentence carved into the planet itself. Remember, what was lost. Even the methods of quarrying whisper coherence. Megalithic blocks across the globe exhibit vitrification. Stone surfaces melted as if by intense heat, leaving glassy sheens that defy copper chisels. Drill holes exhibit spiral cuts consistent with rotary precision. Transport estimates remain implausible. 20-ton stones carried over mountains or across rivers without wheel, crane, or iron tool. The technique seems shared, rediscovered, or remembered imperfectly in each isolated pocket of survival. Such patterns defy explanation within the narrow scale of linear progress. They speak instead to cycles of remembrance and amnesia. We might wonder whether the pattern extended beyond architecture into consciousness itself. If certain geometric forms induce resonance, perhaps the alignment of structures across Earth functioned as a single planetary grid, nodes of an energetic lattice linking human intention with the cosmos. Temples, pyramids, and walls become instruments within that field, harmonizing spiritual and physical space. Myths of ley lines, of dragon energy or kundalini paths, might be distorted memories of this planetary tuning system. The idea sounds mystical, but the geometry is measurable. Consider the old civilizations not as isolated blossoms, but as offshoots of a buried root system. When the collapse came, whether through flood, comet, or shift of the poles, that root fractured, sending survivors to high ground. Each remnant built anew, copying what it could from dim memory, the same ratios, the same alignments, the same sense of purpose. Knowledge degraded like language over generations until mathematics became myth and engineering became prayer. The connection across continents is not trade, it is trauma. The psychological ramifications of this pattern are profound. To accept parallel advancement requires no discomfort. Progress is inevitable. Creativity universal. But to accept inheritance implies loss, fragility, dependence on something once greater. It means civilization is not ascending but recovering, piecing together fragments of a totality that once unified Earth under one geometry. That narrative humbles us. It demands reverence not only for survival, but for memory itself. Travelers who walk among these ruins often describe the same sensation, irrespective of continent: a pressure in the chest, a distant hum, a heavy calm, as though the stones still function even in ruin. Perhaps it is the effect of precise geometry on human perception, the ratio of arc and angle inducing physiological response. Or perhaps it is something subtler, a residual field from whatever purpose the builders first intended. Either way, the kinship between these sites transcends coincidence. It is tactile, experiential, undeniable. Consider the acoustic phenomena found at different sites. In the Great Pyramid, echoes concentrate around 110 Hz. At Chichen Itza's Temple of Kukulkan, a clap yields an echo imitating the chirp of a bird sacred to the region. The amphitheater-like stones of Ollantaytambo generate harmonic reflections scalable to voice. Across continents, architecture modulates sound in similar ways, always human-centered, always tuned to cognition and presence. These were ancient laboratories of resonance, not primitive piles of stone. If you could view the planet from space with eyes tuned not to light, but to geometry, the megalithic sites would form a glowing web, points of balance, rhythm, and memory. Each node radiates proportion, connecting to others through mathematical symmetry. This is not fantasy, but awareness on a different scale. The Earth itself may have been seen as an instrument, tuned periodically by those who understood its resonance cycles, who built monuments not to deities, but to frequencies. Even myths of towers reaching the heavens, The story of Babel, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, echo the same aspiration: reconnection through structure. Humanity builds vertically to touch something it once perceived directly. The memory persists even after the dies. Brick becomes a substitute for vibration, ritual for understanding. Yet buried within myth is the echo of technical memory, a forgotten method of bridging earth and cosmos through frequency and form. In these echoes across oceans, the stones still whisper their allegiance to the same vanished order. They do not contradict one another, they harmonize. At every site, the fingerprint of intention remains. The refusal to be random, the insistence on precision where randomness should reign. Whether guided by one migratory priesthood or by mere resonance within the human mind itself, the alignment persists like music that refuses to end even after the instrument breaks. So we are left with fragments, tuned shards of a forgotten symphony. The same chords repeat in Giza, in Peru, in Polynesia. The score survives, though the musicians are gone. Our task is not to invent new melodies, but to learn to listen again, to recognize that coherence. When one hears it, across oceans, across ages, it becomes impossible to return to silence. The stones hum together, indifferent to our disbelief, carrying the same message over water and sand, that once, long ago, the earth itself was the orchestra, and civilization was its song. Across the face of the earth there lies a silence carved by water. It is not the silence of erosion or time, but of memory drowned beneath silt. Every continent holds the record: sedimentary scars, buried cities, and legends that sound too consistent to be coincidence. The flood, long dismissed as allegory, begins to reveal itself as data. What myths call divine punishment may in fact describe a planetary trauma, an event so overwhelming that its echo shaped the birth of every civilization afterward. Imagine the last glacial epoch ending not gradually but catastrophically. Ice sheets fractured, ocean levels rose, and rivers devoured their banks. The planet released centuries of frozen water in months. The sound would have been like continents screaming, the weight of oceans redistributing upon the crust. The world as our ancestors knew it drowned beneath its own remembering. There was no metaphor here, only water, relentless and real. Evidence for this deluge hides within layers of stone. Core samples from across the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Gulf of Mexico show thick bands of silt deposited suddenly, cutting across older strata like punctuation marks. Fossilized shells rest miles inland, anchored within clay that has never known tide since. All across the Giza plateau, traces of ancient waterlines curve around the monument bases, subtle but stubborn. Even the Sphinx bears the same signature, the grooves of torrent, not of wind. And yet, every culture that survived tells the same story. The Sumerians remembered Ziusudra, the chosen survivor warned of a coming flood. The Greeks spoke of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who repopulated the world after waters receded. The Mayans described an inundation of fire and water, after which new men were shaped from maize. In Egypt, priests whispered to Solon of Atlantis, a civilization drowned when gods lost patience with human pride. These are not merely moral fables. They are archived trauma, encoded into language so it might survive the next silence. For generations, historians catalogued these tales separately, their synchronicity too inconvenient to admit. But the more we correlate geology and mythology, the thinner that curtain grows. Around 11,600 years ago, a massive meltwater pulse struck Earth's oceans, raising global sea levels nearly 80 meters. Coastal cities, settlements, and monuments vanished in months. The flood was not local, it was planetary. The ancients remembered it not as history, but as warning. When the waters retreated, humanity resumed like an interrupted dream. In the new deserts left by retreating seas, survivors rebuilt. They carried fragments, stories, formulas, maps of stars once visible from vanished shores. The memories grew mythic, but remained consistent. A prior world destroyed, knowledge carried in secret. And from those seeds sprouted Sumer, Egypt, the Indus, and Mesoamerica. Civilization, therefore, may not have begun. It may have recommenced. The flood myths were too coherent to originate separately. Each emphasizes both destruction and preservation. Something was saved. Instructions were hidden, coded in proportion, ritual, and architecture. The builders of Giza could have been not inventors but archivists, encoding their heritage in limestone precisely because paper and clay crumble. The pyramid becomes less tomb, more library, one that could endure any deluge. Not words but geometry, not history but instruction. Geological patterns whisper the same story. At the boundary where the Younger Dryas cooling ends, we find a global layer of burn and silt, microscopic glass beads from impact, carbonized earth from wildfire, then soot overlain by flood sediment, fire followed by water. The rhythm echoes in myth, punishment descending as both flame and tide, chaos followed by renewal. The ancients did not imagine it, they remembered it. We, the amnesiacs of the planet, are only beginning to decode their memory. In Giza's context, this reinterpretation changes everything. Suppose the Great Pyramid predates the flood. Suppose it was built to outlast it. Then its sealed chambers, redundant tunnels, and star alignments all serve a singular purpose: preservation across catastrophe. Even the so-called ventilation shafts now appear as instruments not for breath, but for memory, channels linking the structure with the heavens when the surface of Earth itself would drown. The builders were not naive, they were bracing for submersion. Under this lens, the Sphinx becomes sentinel, a witness to submergence scratched by centuries of rain when the air was tropical and violent with moisture. It watched as rivers rose into oceans, as sand replaced grass, as memory collapsed into myth. When the floodwaters fell away, it remained, scarred but standing, waiting for a mind capable of reading its wounds. The Sphinx is not guardian of the dead, it is guardian of the forgotten. The idea that flood myths hold geological fact forces a question more unsettling. Has this happened before, and will it happen again? Earth's axis wobbles, ice responds. Satellites confirm we live within another pulse of meltwater, slow but inevitable. What the ancients recorded as wrath may have been physics, axial precession, solar flare, cosmic debris. They built enduring stone because they knew how frail everything else was. The cataclysm was not their apocalypse, it was their calibration. Sediment dating from submerged coastlines hints at entire cities now hidden under waves, off India's Gulf of Cambay, off the shores of Japan near Yonaguni, and beneath the Mediterranean basin. Each site reveals symmetrical layouts, steps and walls that look planned, not natural. Whether's coincidence or architecture's grave, they all rest at depths consistent with that same post-glacial deluge. Human hands once lived where dolphins swim. The flood was not fabrication, it was erasure. What we call myths may be the ancient world's operating manuals, compressed symbols explaining how to rebuild civilization after collapse. Noah's Ark, Deucalion's chest, Utnapishtim's vessel, all containers of seed, knowledge, and memory. Whether literal or allegorical, these arcs represent preservation strategies. The pyramid is another kind of arc, not of wood but of resonance, carrying information encoded in stone angles and auric frequencies. Its message is silent but universal: remember and rebuild. The global trauma left physiological imprints too. Genetic studies show sudden population bottlenecks roughly coinciding with the flood epoch. Humanity nearly vanished, reduced to a fraction of its prior number. That which survived did so through myth, ritual, and architecture. The telling of stories became the vessel by which information crossed generations without language. And so, in every culture, flood equals rebirth. Death equals archive newly opened. To gaze upon Giza with this context is to watch the surface tremble. The desert around it was once seafloor, its limestone shaped beneath oceans millions of years older than humankind. The builders used those same marine stones to create endurance against that very element, an ancient irony, deliberate or instinctive, that fuses consciousness with geology. The pyramid is water's paradox, born of sea, built to resist sea, whispering even now of forgotten tides. Each civilization that rose afterward carried remnants of the flood's fingerprint. In Sumer, flood myths merged with calendars tracking lunar cycles, the same rhythm that measures tides. In Egypt, Nilotic inundation became the axis of agriculture. In Mesoamerica, the world was said to have ended 4 times before. These repetitions are not imagination, they are coping mechanisms. The collective psyche of humanity still ripples with the trauma of nearly drowning. Our creation myths are simply trauma made sacred. Today we interpret those myths for comfort, not instruction. We see deluge as divine trial, not cosmological event. But imagine reading them as disguise to survive superstition, a generational transmission of environmental warning, a way to make future humans remember the danger of imbalance. The ancients crafted their caution in immortal form, fearing precisely the arrogance that now blinds us, the belief that civilization stands beyond is reach. The flood was fact. Denial was the second catastrophe. When modern scholars speak of prehistory, they mean a time without writing. Yet the flood marks a deeper wound, a time when humanity forgot its own past. Writing itself may have been the reaction to that forgetting, an act of protection against another silence. The first symbols were not for trade or ritual, they were memorials, prayers that knowledge might survive the next wave. Every clay tablet, every wall carving, every pyramid is a raft upon the same infinite sea. And perhaps that is what connects every ancient monument, the silent recognition that memory is fragile and water eternal. The flood was not merely an end, but a teacher. It sculpted humility into the human genome, whispering that permanence is illusion. The Great Pyramid's alignment with Orion, its precision, its endurance, all become the physical embodiment of defiance against forgetting. As the sea takes what flesh cannot guard, stone holds what words cannot. In that sense, Giza is the ultimate monument to survival, the ark of mathematics, the fossil of consciousness. Its geometry says what languages cannot, that catastrophe is cyclical, but knowledge can be made cyclical too. Every block, erosion line, and angle forms part of a message from those who endured the last flood to those destined for the next. Whether we listen or not may determine whether our own legacy survives as theirs did, as silence sealed in stone, awaiting rediscovery after the waters fall. Why does the thought of a forgotten civilization hold us in its quiet gravity? Why does the story of a world before ours, grander and wiser, feel like both longing and warning at once. The fascination is not merely historical, it is psychological. Deep within the human mind, there is a recognition that something was lost, and not just physically, but spiritually. The ruins we uncover do not merely evoke curiosity, they stir grief. Across the centuries, we have built layers of civilization over the same ancient fear that everything can vanish. Empires rise believing themselves eternal, yet the sands of Egypt and the jungles of Central America whisper otherwise. We need the myth of the lost world because it speaks to our impermanence, reminding us that knowledge can die faster than flesh. That craving for the forgotten world is not escapism, it is survival instinct trying to remember its first language. When modern minds gaze upon Giza, they do not only see limestone and shadow, they see themselves mirrored in the arrogance and fragility of the builders. Something in the symmetry calls to memory at a level below thought, a recognition that humanity has been here before, great, confident, and then gone. The lost world fascinates not because it explains the past, but because it haunts the future. The pyramids do not only point upward, they point backward into memory's vanished architecture. Every generation believes it stands at the apex of civilization. We map galaxies, split atoms, decode genes, and yet, standing before the pyramids, all that achievement feels recent, almost fragile. If something older accomplished symmetry on this scale with methods we cannot reproduce, what does that say about progress? Perhaps advancement is not accumulation, but recurrence, each cycle trying to recover the same eternal geometry of wisdom, and losing it again through pride. The lost world becomes both ancestor and mirror. The attraction also lies in relief. To imagine a civilization before history implies that meaning existed before us, that our lives participate in a continuity older than recorded time. Without that, everything feels abrupt, a cosmic accident. The myth restores purpose, intertwining our modern despair with an older rhythm. It reassures us that even if we forget, creation remembers. The stones remain loyal, even when we are not. Yet there is more than comfort here, there is guilt. If others once reached a height greater than ours and fell, what does that imply about us? The lost world myth contains an unspoken accusation that we too are sleepwalking toward oblivion. Every skyscraper and circuit board becomes reflection of the same blindness. Our obsession with lost worlds may disguise fear of our own trajectory, a subconscious recognition that civilization, like everything else, has fault lines invisible until collapse. And still we romanticize it. We imagine Atlantean sages, Egyptian architects aligned with stars, vanished astronomers decoding cycles longer than civilizations themselves. But beneath the mystique lies a truer reason for our fascination: envy. We envy those who lived in harmony with the cosmos, when technology did not isolate but integrate, when measure and meaning were not at war. The myth becomes aspiration disguised as archaeology, a longing to restore balance between the mechanical and the sacred. Scientific minds may sneer at this yearning, yet it endures precisely because data alone cannot soothe existential ache. We sense intuitively that intelligence devoid of reverence self-destructs. The lost civilization operates as archetype of wisdom, not technology. Knowledge tempered by humility. Progress synchronized with rhythm rather than dominance. We look backward because we suspect the key to survival lies behind us, not ahead. The power of the lost world myth also lies in its inclusivity. Every culture, no matter how remote, holds a version of it. Floods, fires, falling stars, all preludes to renewal. The omnipresence of this narrative suggests it is woven into the species' collective psyche. It binds us not through fact, but through recognition of shared fragility. It reminds us that beneath our divided tongues, we still dream the same dream, that something precious slipped from our grasp, and redemption is the act of remembering. In our modern age, the myth evolves into a metaphor for endangered knowledge. Libraries burn, data corrupts, ecosystems collapse, and each loss feels like a microcosm of Atlantis sinking again. The idea of an ancient civilization becomes symbolic of everything we fear losing now: connection, beauty, continuity. Its persistence in culture is evidence of our desperation to believe memory can resist entropy. Without myth, forgetting becomes irreversible. With it, we maintain the faint hope of recovery. But perhaps the fascination is not only collective, it is personal. To search for a lost world is to search within oneself for buried wisdom, instincts suppressed by modern noise. The temples of Giza awaken this sensation because they manifest permanence we secretly crave. Their silence resonates like meditation incarnate, an architecture of stillness. We do not seek Atlanteans in the desert, we seek ourselves before distraction, before division, before forgetting who built us. Even skepticism plays a role in the cycle. For every believer in ancient wisdom, there is a scholar who refutes it. This tension sustains vitality. Without challenge, myth ossifies into dogma. Without mystery, intellect starves. The dialogue between belief and denial mirrors the architecture itself, two opposing forces maintaining equilibrium. The myth survives not because it is provable, but because it keeps humble and imagination alive. It reminds us that truth wears many dialects. When you contemplate the possibility of lost civilizations, something vibrates in the deepest layer of consciousness. It is the same pulse that haunted poets and scientists alike, the intuition that the universe is cyclic. Stars die, planets renew, species rise and vanish, and knowledge, too, obeys that spiral. The ancients who carved stone into geometry did not aim for eternity, they aimed for recurrence. They built so that the next awakening would have a map. Perhaps that is the ultimate reason we need the lost world. It affirms that memory is transferable, even through catastrophe. It refutes the nihilism of finite time. If something intelligent preceded us and encoded warnings into myth and stone, then meaning survives destruction. The pyramids become instruments of continuity, vibrating across epochs like a tuning fork, struck once in antiquity, still faintly humming today. To deny the myth would be to deny resonance itself. The myth further challenges our faith in linearity. Society celebrates growth as ascent. But what if ascent is illusion? What if knowledge expands like breath, each exhalation a civilization, each inhalation a collapse? The lost world suggests not beginning and end, but rhythm. Creation, dissolution, remembrance, creation again. Progress, then, is not upward but cyclical. Our fascination is rebellion against the tyranny of straight lines. There is also an emotional seduction, awe. Awe dissolves ego. Confronted with the scale of ancient monuments, one feels the same tremor as when staring into the night sky. The distinction between humanity and cosmos disappears. That experience, too, may be inheritance from the lost world, a physiological trace of reverence once universal. We cannot replicate their architecture, but we can still experience their state of mind. The fascination is our only surviving bridge. Even the skeptic's heart softens when night falls over the Giza plateau. The stars emerge, echoing the alignments carved into stone millennia before. In that moment of stillness, the mind feels small, and the smallness feels right. This humility, more than any other relic, may be the true legacy of the ancients, the knowledge that greatness lies not in control, but in awareness of one's impermanence. The myth engages us because it reawakens reverence in a world that has forgotten how to kneel. Perhaps the myth persists because on some level, we fear we are the lost civilization of tomorrow. The signs accumulate: climate shift, disconnection, overconsumption, arrogance. We sense the same precursors to decline that might have undone those before us. In speaking of Atlantis or Giza as inheritance, we are warning ourselves. The fascination is prophecy by proxy, the voice of memory begging the future not to repeat the ritual of self-erasure. If the lost civilization existed, it was destroyed by indifference to harmony. If it did not, it still serves its purpose, to remind us how easily brilliance turns to ash. The story's truth lies not in fact, but in function. It exists so that every generation might confront its own reflection in the still water before the tide returns. The myth is not about them. It is about us. In the end, we need the lost world because it restores scale. It humbles us, yet invites us to rebuild meaning. It warns that knowledge is not possession, but stewardship. The buried world beneath Giza is not only archaeological, it is metaphorical, a mirror beneath the sand reflecting every age that dares to forget. And when we imagine those ancient builders gazing toward Orion, perhaps they were not watching stars at all, but spectres of the future, us, waiting to remember. Everything begins in silence again, the kind that carries more weight than sound. The desert hums beneath the night wind, and the pyramids stand as though waiting for a question only the patient can hear. After everything, the erosion, the mathematics, the alignments, the myths, what remains is an awareness too uncomfortable to ignore. The stones have been speaking all along, but we have forgotten the language. If civilization is a conversation with time, then Giza is its most articulate sentence. Each block carries grammar older than writing, syntax written in alignment and proportion. The builders inscribed no words because they knew speech decays. They trusted geometry because it speaks across extinction. To touch the limestone is to touch continuity itself, a dialogue between vanished intellects and the still unfolding human story. What, then, are the pyramids saying? Their message hums beneath every measurement, whispering through ratios and resonance. They declare that permanence is possible, though not through conquest or wealth, but through precision. That meaning, encoded correctly, can survive even when memory cannot. They exist as archive and admonition simultaneously. Record of brilliance, warning of forgetting. Imagine those who laid the foundation under the glare of an ancient sun. They measured not only distance but destiny, aligning stone with sky until both formed a harmonic whole. Their purpose was not devotion to Pharaoh or God, but duty to time itself. They built as scribes, not artisans, engineers of eternity tasked with writing what language could not hold. When they were done, they left nothing but silence, knowing the silence would speak. To modern eyes, that silence feels alien. We expect history to explain itself, to be readable through documents, tools, and artifacts. But Giza answers only in geometry, forcing the human mind to translate structure into thought. This is the true test. Can we still think as they did, in patterns, frequencies, and symbolic precision? Our inability to understand may not reflect their mystery, but our amnesia. Every anomaly we have encountered, the Sphinx's water scars, the stellar alignments, the acoustic frequencies, points toward a single philosophical truth. We are not the beginning. We are the continuation of an older equation, an unfinished sentence whose remainder still awaits discovery. Civilizations do not invent meaning. They inherit it like unfinished music. The melody drifts through time until another culture remembers the tune. Perhaps that continuity is what the stones are trying to restore. They stand as calibrations between Earth and cosmos, reminding us that each is reflection of the other. The pyramid unites heaven and ground into one geometry, its angle mirroring Earth's latitude, its orientation chasing the dying stars of Orion. The structure is not simply monument, but metric, proof that the ancients measured life not by years, but by harmonic relationship with the universe. Consider the profound patience built into that idea. To align with celestial cycles that span millennia is to think in cosmic time, not human lifetime. It demands humility, an understanding that architecture can outlast its maker and still carry meaning forward. When modernity builds, it measures in decades. When the ancients built, they measured in ages. The stones remind us that meaning requires scale, and scale requires silence. The stones also teach through endurance. Sandstorms, emperors, earthquakes, all have come and gone, yet the pyramids remain, weathered but unbroken. Their very survival invalidates transience as absolute law. In them, structure has transcended decay. That endurance is not accident, but philosophy carved into matter, permanence achieved through harmony rather than resistance. The builders did not defy, they became part of its rhythm. Standing before such a design, one feels both awe and accountability. The stones are not relics, they are witnesses. Their faces have watched civilizations rise and die, their shadows lengthen across shifting sands, their silence accumulating memory. They know what humanity forgets, that every triumph is temporary unless placed in proper proportion to eternity. Their weight anchors humility to the living world. If the message of Giza could be condensed into language, it might say this: knowledge is responsibility. To understand the world is to preserve it. Those who forget their origins are destined to repeat the collapse their ancestors warned against. The builders encoded not religion, but physics, not dogma, but harmony. They modeled stability, not of empire, but of alignment between human intention and universal law. Across all their faces, one pattern repeats: orientation to celestial north. North, the fixed point by which wanderers navigate, by which even stars appear to turn. The pyramids thus become compasses rooted in stone, aligning civilization itself with the unchanging amidst motion. The builders may have meant more than navigation. They may have meant remembrance, that amid chaos, guidance is found only by fixing one's attention on the silent, constant behind movement. Archaeology seeks answers in tangible dust and delta. Mythology searches in story and spirit. Yet both now converge at Giza, where myth becomes measurable and stone becomes metaphysical. The line separating from spirituality blurs, revealing architecture as alchemy, the art of fusing heaven's order with earth's impermanence. This fusion is the heart of the message. The pyramid is not built to be understood, it is built to awaken understanding. We can sense the same principle in ourselves. If consciousness is structure within flesh, perhaps the human body is a kind of living pyramid, aligned, resonant, capable of becoming bridge between matter and meaning. The ancients may have known this correspondence intuitively, encoding self-recognition into their architecture. To enter the king's chamber was to enter oneself. To awaken, there was to remember what being human meant before forgetting became our inheritance. In that sense, the message extends far beyond history. It becomes psychological, even spiritual. The pyramid teaches patience, symmetry, silence, the core virtues of continuity. A civilization that embodies these does not fear collapse because it knows how to rebuild. The ancients understood that knowledge divorced from reverence breeds ruin. Reverence protects what intellect cannot. Every misalignment in modernity, ecological, moral, social, reflects our refusal to listen to the geometry of wisdom. But the stones are patient. They do not judge. They wait. They wait for an era capable of hearing vibration beneath noise, for minds quiet enough to perceive meaning without translation. The message was carved for posterity, not immediacy. One day, humanity would rediscover resonance, realize architecture was not primitive superstition, but advanced remembrance, a blueprint hiding philosophy disguised as measurement. When that recognition dawns, the pyramid becomes mirror. You realize the silence is not external, it resides in you. The geometry outside corresponds to patterns within thought. The same ratios govern neurons and galaxies alike. The builders did not sculpt godhood into stone. They simply reminded us that divinity already existed within proportion. The stones were designed to make the viewer their final component, completing the circuit between builder, structure, and consciousness. This possibility explains why the pyramid continues to hypnotize millennia later. It is both question and answer, silence and echo. It does not declare its origin, it draws you into partnership, making your contemplation part of its design. In this way, the message transcends era, culture, and skepticism. The pyramid remains complete only when witnessed, just as knowledge remains alive only when remembered. Perhaps that, finally, is the secret of the lost civilization. They never vanished. They became stone. Their thoughts solidified into architecture awaiting reanimation through comprehension. Humanity itself is the missing equation, the final variable that must remember how to read geometry as language. The stones speak still, but only minds attuned to pattern can hear. We are both the audience and the translators of a message left for ourselves. Each era decides anew what the pyramids mean. To the pharaohs, they were divine thresholds. To conquerors, they were curiosities. To scientists, they are puzzles of engineering. Yet beyond interpretation, the stones remain, indifferent, patient, resonating the same silent phrase. All civilizations are temporary, but truth is not. Those who wish to endure must align themselves with order more ancient than ambition. Stand before them now, the dusk lights sliding across their perfect edges, the wind carrying dust from centuries into your lungs. You are breathing history, swallowing the same air that touched the hands that carved eternity. The stones do not ask worship, they ask awareness. In their enduring geometry lies the question every age must answer anew. Will we remember this time? Or must time teach us again through ruin? If you listen carefully, truly listen, you will hear what they've been saying since the first shadow touched their surface. It is not myth nor riddle, but reminder. Everything built in disharmony collapses, but what is aligned endures. Knowledge dies when separated from humility. And civilization, like light, can only travel forward if rooted firmly in the silence that began it all. That is what the stones are trying to tell us, patiently, wordlessly, unceasingly, until we listen.
If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe, and activate notifications so you don't miss our next videos.